I have two children. I have a teenage daughter, Nile. She's my tiny dancer. I have a 12-year-old son, Avery. Avery is living with autism. Avery was diagnosed with autism when he was 21 months. And when you have a child who is diagnosed with autism, you also have a family that has autism. I've said for years that Nile makes me a better parent, but Avery, he makes me a better person. See, autism doesn't care whether you're black or you're white. It doesn't care whether you're rich or you're poor. It doesn't care if you have one parent, two parents, three parents, if you are an only child or there are 5 more siblings in your home. Autism doesn't discriminate. People discriminate. Raising a young, gifted, and black son living with autism comes with its own set of challenges and rewards. It comes with its rules and its expectations. It comes with its own questions. And I grapple with those questions every single day as a parent, as an educator, as an entrepreneur, and as a partner. See, I go across the country, I'm a teacher, and I also go across the country doing workshops and presentations on autism education and culturally responsive teaching. And it hasn't been until recently that those worlds have started to collide as my son, my young black son, is navigating through the educational system. A few months ago, Fusion Network came to my home and did a video on my son and my husband, and really talking about this idea of race and autism and how those work and how they work in our family. And it had almost, I think maybe 100,000 or 1 million hits on Facebook. And it was a very touching video. And there were lots of comments, and the comments were generally well received. But then there were some comments, as there always are comments, and there are comments that were not so accepting, of not accepting the fact that race could have something to do with how my son with autism was being treated. And those comments generally went something like, you know, my son was treated poorly too, race has nothing to do with it, and my son was white, or my son was Latino, and there was quite a few of that. And for the people that I tried to respond to, I tried to tell them that, you know what, I think that's what makes autism so unique, is that I'm allowed to have my experiences, and you're allowed to have your experiences, and that's what makes autism autism. So when Avery was first diagnosed at 21 months, we knew that it was going to be a challenge. We didn't know what we were going to expect. We didn't know what kind of outcomes he was going to have. We didn't know, and my husband and I in a relationship, how we were going to make it. But this is what I do know. I know that 1 in 49 children in the state of New Jersey is diagnosed with autism. I know that that's 1 in every 2 classrooms. So as an educator who prepares future teachers and works with current teachers, I know that there are general education teachers and special education teachers out there ill-prepared to handle people like my young, gifted, and black son. I know that there is a disparity. Research goes back as far as 2007, 2005, that talks about the disparity between diagnosis of white children and black children. And when they present with the same set of symptoms, that children who are black are more likely to be diagnosed with a conduct disorder or an adjustment disorder or an intellectual disability. So when we were thinking about our son and what kind of life he was going to have, it really became important to us to try to learn the language, to navigate the systems, to learn what the doctors were saying, to engage with the community of parents, to really just try to soak up this new life with autism. And in 2007, my husband and I formed Greater Expectations Teaching and Advocacy Center, where we educate parents, we educate professionals, we run a dad support group to continue to re-engage fathers in this process of raising children with autism. So when I think about preparing our children for the future, my Nile and my Avery, I talk about, you know, we think I'm preparing, we're gonna set up a college fund. Right? That's what you think about preparing. I'm setting up a college fund for you. Why? There's a running joke in my house that yes, you have your college fund, but there's also this pot of money for whenever you decide to go see the counselor after how bad we messed you up trying to prepare you. And so that's my thing with Nile. But when I think about this idea of race and autism, it's so hard to explain to Avery. See, Avery lives it, but he can't see it. See, Avery lives in binaries. Things are on or they're off. They are hot or they're cold, they're right or they're wrong, they're black or they're white. And not the kind of black and white that we understand, those nuances of black and white, those nuances of racism, that hidden curriculum that's happening in our schools. They're characteristics, like your shoe size or your hair color. No two people are the same. And that's the way it's supposed to be, right? And those are the rules. And those rules make sense to him. So as I think about how autism has affected his life and our lives, I'm realizing that autism has actually given Avery the ability to overlook racism. And so when I'm trying to prepare my young, gifted, and black son for the world that is happening around him, am I actually teaching him racism when I try to prepare him? Is pointing out those nuances, reinforcing the social class as a second-class citizen? Am I teaching him racism by telling him that there are people out there who are going to judge you, who are going to misjudge you, who are going to look at your behaviors, your tone, your affect, how you understand the world? Do I tell him that there are people who are threatened by your youth, threatened by your gifts, threatened by your abilities, threatened by your blackness, threatened by your autism? Do I tell him, am I teaching him racism when I tell him that, if I tell him that there are still people out there who believe black to be a physical and intellectual disability? Or do I tell him that disability lies in the people who have those beliefs? See, our family lives by rules. We have rules for everything. We have rules for shaking hands. We have rules for eye contact. We have rules for when people dare you at school, which they're not your friends. We have rules for when teachers use sarcasm. We have rules for making friends, for answering the phone, for giving and receiving compliments. We have rules for school. We have rules for home. We have rules for church. We have rules for shopping. We have rules for parties. We have rules for summer camps. We have rules for everything. So how do I explain the rules of racism? How do I make plain and reveal to him that which is inherently hidden? And what happens when those rules that we establish in our home conflict with the rules that he has somewhere else? So what rules of racism need to be constructed, deconstructed, or reconstructed? See, in our classrooms and in our schools, our students of color, particularly our students with autism of color, do not have the same luxury as their typically developing peers. They don't always understand those nuanced communication patterns that happen, which oftentimes leads to miscues and misunderstandings and misinterpretations. He doesn't really understand the coded language of adults, the hidden curriculum of schools, the implicit bias of racism unless it's taught, unless we make it a rule. And there's one rule that we have in my house. It's the "is this sarcasm" rule. So it goes like this. If somebody in my house uses sarcasm and Avery doesn't understand it, he's allowed to say, "Is that sarcasm?" Which works in my home. But when he goes to school, to the teacher who already thinks they have deficit views of him, to the teacher who doesn't understand his autism, how do they interpret that? They interpret that as challenging, as threatening, as not understanding how the things that work for him at home don't work for him outside. So my husband and I, we've been doing this special education thing for 10 years now, and you know, we're really good at it. And I remember walking into one meeting just being exhausted, saying, "I'm not going to talk." We went to a new school. I said, "I'm not going to talk. I'm not going to let them know that I'm an educator. I'm not going to let them know that I'm anything. I'm just going to be a parent. I'm just going to sit there and take notes and let them tell me what my job as a parent is supposed to be." And I did this for two reasons. One, because they only spoke to me. Even when my husband was sitting right next to me, they only spoke to me. And generally, we know what school teachers look like. They're white and they're female. And they would only talk to me. So I said, that's not really going to work for my family. Because in order for this to work, he has to be engaged. He has to be involved. They were rendering him invisible. And correct me if I'm wrong, but he was the only one that I know that was a black man raising another black man with autism. So maybe we should engage the experts, because he was the expert. And so that helped me to understand that as a teacher raising a young black man with ASD, I cannot ignore families' funds of knowledge. Every family has something that works for them that the schools need to really understand. That we have to look at family as first culture and not school as better culture. We have to become culturally responsive in our teaching. We have to develop a self-awareness of our lens and our biases. Otherwise, we will impose those on the children which we are sworn to serve. And we will make sense of their experiences by using our own lenses. Culturally responsive teaching tells us that different is not weird, different is new. Culturally responsive teaching tells us that we have to believe that we can be an agent of change, that we believe that we can make a difference. Culturally responsive teaching also tells us that color blindness is the biggest lie ever. Color blindness undermines the very thing that makes Avery beautiful. The very thing that I have to consider as I'm raising a young black man with autism. So, his blackness matters. His blackness is the difference between the length of his tantrum and how long he's given to recover. Whether his teacher allows him to use his coping skills or whether she's impatient. Right? His blackness is the difference between a misunderstanding and what some might then call an altercation. It's the difference between a referral to the child study team or a referral to the office. It's the difference between a teacher's email versus a teacher's phone call. It's the difference between him showing affection and it being perceived as an act of aggression. His autism is the difference between your perception and his reality. His blackness is the difference between his life and his death. We have to understand that children, even children with autism, especially children with autism, are whole people. They are full of experiences. They are full of multiple identities and multiple roles. Avery's a trombonist, he's a dancer, he's a red belt, he's an actor, he's a singer, he's a stinking American Ninja warrior. Okay, he's a son, he's a brother, he's a student, he's a cousin. There are things and rules that exist outside of the world of school. And understanding that will yield empathy and compassion in our teachers. That will help us make room for the differences. So what do I really tell Avery about racism? I tell them that there's no such thing as normal. That normal is quite frankly overrated. Right? That's the best compliment anybody ever gave you. You're normal. What? Everyone has a disability. Everyone sees, hears, thinks, and feels differently about something. That everyone has weaknesses, and if we're going to make the most of our lives, we need to use our strengths to supplement our weaknesses. That I tell him that those who enact racism, quite frankly, have a disability. And that his autism allows him to see past their racism and look at their humanity. I tell him I wish that I were more like him. So what does Avery teach us? Avery teaches us to be aware of the rules that we're creating and that we're teaching and that we're perpetuating. Avery teaches us to consider what's developmentally appropriate for kids. He teaches us to celebrate the special skills and talents that we have. He teaches us to value the funds of knowledge that families bring. He teaches us to challenge our own beliefs and our own thoughts about normal. I think that Avery would tell you that his life, being young, gifted, and black, is pretty amazing. And autism has everything to do with that. Thank you.